The worst conversation of my life happened at my college roommate's wedding. I stood awkwardly by the appetizer table when someone asked what I did for a living. I launched into a painfully detailed explanation of my job, complete with industry jargon and technical specifications that absolutely nobody cared about. The woman's eyes glazed over within seconds. She nodded politely while scanning the room for escape routes. When I finally paused for breath, she mumbled something about needing a drink and vanished into the crowd. I spent the rest of the night hiding near the dessert table, replaying that interaction and wondering, why do some people effortlessly create connections while others, like me, leave conversations feeling like they need to apologize for existing? The truth is that making meaningful connections isn't magic. It is not about having the perfect opening line or being the most interesting person in the room. The real secret: the most skilled connection builders use techniques similar to those employed by professional therapists, but without the clinical setting or awkward power dynamics. Think about it. Therapists are masters at building rapport with complete strangers. They create safe spaces where people feel comfortable sharing their deepest thoughts within minutes of meeting. Now, imagine having that superpower in everyday social situations, the ability to make anyone feel truly seen and understood, without it feeling forced or awkward. The good news? You do not need a psychology degree to apply these principles. This narrative breaks down how therapists build trust and connection, translating their professional techniques into practical social skills you can use immediately, at parties, networking events, first dates, or even awkward family gatherings. But why should you care about this approach specifically? Because most social advice falls into two problematic categories: manipulative techniques that feel inauthentic, or vague suggestions to just be yourself that offer no practical guidance. The therapist-inspired approach is different. It is genuine, ethical, and, most importantly, it works because it focuses on the fundamental human need to be understood. Before we dive in, consider this: what if the greatest obstacle to connection is not what you are saying, but how you are listening? What if making friends is less about performing and more about creating space? And what if the skills to do this are already within your reach? Let us explore the psychology behind meaningful connections, unpack the techniques therapists use to build instant rapport, and discover how you can adapt these skills to transform your social interactions without feeling like you are giving someone therapy. Zane Quincy always considered himself reasonably social. He had friends, maintained good relationships with colleagues, and rarely experienced anxiety at parties. Yet something was missing. His connections often felt superficial, conversations predictable, and deeper friendships elusive. "I kept thinking something was wrong with me," Zane told me. "Everyone else seemed to form these instant bonds while I was stuck having the same surface-level conversations over and over." Zane's experience reflects a common misunderstanding about how meaningful connections actually form. Most of us approach social interactions with a fundamentally flawed assumption: that connection comes from impressing others, having the most interesting job, telling the most entertaining stories, or demonstrating our value through achievements and knowledge. This performance-based approach is precisely why so many social interactions feel unsatisfying. Research conducted by psychologist Harry Rees at the University of Rochester reveals that authentic connection depends not on performance, but on what he terms perceived partner responsiveness. The feeling that the other person understands, validates, and cares about our thoughts and feelings. In other words, connection isn't built by being impressive, it's built by being attentive. This misunderstanding explains why we often leave social events feeling empty despite having spoken to dozens of people. We focus on broadcasting rather than receiving. We prepare clever anecdotes instead of developing our capacity to listen. We worry about being interesting instead of being interested. Consider the conversations that have made you feel most connected to someone. Chances are they weren't monologues where you showcased your accomplishments. More likely, they were exchanges where you felt truly seen and understood by the other person. This phenomenon was illustrated in a fascinating study by psychologists at Harvard University. Researchers found that people who engaged in deep, meaningful conversations with strangers reported significantly higher levels of happiness and satisfaction than those who stuck to small talk. However, Participants consistently overestimated how awkward deeper conversations would be and underestimated how much others would care about their thoughts and feelings. This disconnect between our expectations and reality creates a self-perpetuating cycle. We avoid depth because we fear awkwardness or rejection, which leads to superficial interactions, which in turn confirms our belief that meaningful connection is difficult to achieve. Emma Thompson, a social psychologist, encountered this pattern repeatedly in her research. People crave authentic connection but sabotage opportunities for it by hiding behind social masks, she explains. We are so afraid of being vulnerable that we prevent others from connecting with our authentic selves. This insight brings us to a pivotal question. If performance and impression management hinder rather than help connection, what approach actually works? The answer lies in understanding how therapists approach human interaction. Unlike most of us, therapists are trained to prioritize understanding over performance, curiosity over demonstration, and presence over presentation. They create connection not by impressing their clients, but by creating spaces where clients feel safe to express their authentic thoughts and feelings. But how exactly do they do this? And more importantly, how can we adapt these techniques for everyday social situations without making others feel like they are being analyzed or treated as patients? The fundamental shift involves moving from a self-centered to an other-centered approach to conversation. This does not mean erasing yourself or becoming a passive listener. Rather, it means recognizing that genuine connection forms when both people feel understood. For example, when Zane began focusing more on understanding others than being understood, he noticed an immediate shift in the quality of his interactions. I stopped preparing what I would say next and started actually processing what the other person was sharing, he recalls. Suddenly conversations had this depth and flow that had always been missing before. This shift required Zane to overcome several deeply ingrained habits. First, he had to stop seeing conversation as a competition for attention or approval. Second, he needed to reframe silence from something awkward to be filled to a valuable tool that creates space for thought and genuine expression. Third, he had to develop comfort with vulnerability, both witnessing it in others and gradually sharing his own. These adjustments did not come easily. Like many of us, Zane had spent decades developing conversational habits designed to protect himself from rejection and judgment. Changing these patterns required conscious effort and practice. However, the results proved worth the discomfort. Within months, Zane found himself developing friendships that felt qualitatively different from previous relationships. People started seeking me out for conversations, he says. One friend told me I was the only person she felt truly heard her. That was when I realized something had fundamentally changed. The science supports Zane's experience. Researcher John Gottman found that successful relationships depend not on compatibility of interests or personality traits, but on what he calls emotional bids. Moments when one person reaches out for connection and the other person either turns toward or away from that bid. The most successful relationships, Gottman discovered, were those where both partners consistently turned toward each other's bids for connection. This brings us to an important question. What specific techniques do therapists use to turn toward others in conversation? And how can we adapt these techniques for everyday social situations? When Eleanor Thomas entered the crowded industry conference, her instinct was to find a quiet corner and scroll through her phone. As an engineer who preferred logic to small talk, networking events had always felt like torture. But this time was different. Eleanor had been studying therapeutic communication techniques and decided to experiment with them in this high-pressure social environment. Rather than approaching conversations with her usual goal, to impress potential clients or employers, Eleanor adopted what therapists call unconditional positive regard. She entered each interaction with genuine curiosity and acceptance, regardless of the person's status or potential usefulness to her career. The results were remarkable. Not only did Eleanor connect with more people than at any previous event, but the quality of those connections transformed. People kept telling me how easy I was to talk to, she later recounted. One CEO even asked if I had a background in counseling. I just laughed and said I was just genuinely interested in his work. What Eleanor had discovered was the first and perhaps most fundamental therapeutic technique for connection: genuine presence. Therapists understand that true presence, the art of being fully engaged with another person without distraction or agenda, creates a foundation for trust that no amount of charisma or social skill can replace. This presence comprises several elements that we can adapt for everyday social situations. First is what therapists call bracketing, the practice of temporarily setting aside your own concerns, judgments, and responses to fully focus on the other person. In therapeutic settings, practitioners literally imagine placing their personal reactions in brackets outside the room. In social settings, this might mean mentally noting but not immediately acting on thoughts like, "I disagree with that," "I have a better story," or "I wonder how I appear right now." Zane Quincy practiced this technique at a friend's dinner party by silently acknowledging distracting thoughts. His upcoming work presentation, a disagreement with his partner, then gently returning his attention to the conversation at hand. "I realized how rarely I was truly listening before," he admitted. "Most of the time I was just waiting for my turn to speak while planning what I would say next." The second element of presence is nonverbal attunement, communicating engagement through eye contact, facial expressions, and body language. Therapists are trained to maintain appropriate eye contact, to orient their bodies toward clients, and to use facial expressions that communicate understanding rather than judgment. Eleanor found that simply adjusting her posture, turning toward conversation partners rather than standing with one foot pointed toward the exit, dramatically improved the quality of her interactions. "People respond to these cues subconsciously," she noted. "When your body communicates, 'I am here with you,' people feel it even if they cannot name what's different." The third component of therapeutic presence is temporal focus, maintaining awareness of the present moment rather than dwelling on past interactions or anticipating future ones. Psychologists call this mindful presence, and it allows for genuine reaction rather than rehearsed response. This quality is particularly challenging in social situations, where anxiety often pulls us into worrying about past social blunders or anticipating future awkwardness. One technique Eleanor used was the five senses check-in, briefly noting one thing she could see, hear, feel, smell, and taste in the moment, which anchored her attention to the present interaction. "When I caught myself worrying about what to say next, I would quickly run through my senses to bring myself back," she explained. It sounds simple, but it completely changed how present I felt in conversations. These elements of presence serve as the foundation for connection because they create what psychologists call psychological safety, the sense that one can express thoughts and feelings without fear of negative consequences. Consider how different this approach is from typical social interactions. Most of us enter conversations with implicit goals: to be liked, to impress, to network, to avoid awkwardness. These goals create internal pressure that prevents true presence. We become so focused on our performance that we miss opportunities for genuine connection. Therapists, by contrast, create connection through disciplined presence, a skill that can be developed through practice. This brings us to an important distinction. Presence is not the same as passivity. Many people mistake therapeutic listening for simply staying quiet and nodding along. True therapeutic presence is active and engaged. Zane discovered this distinction when practicing these techniques at work. "At first, I thought being present meant just letting people talk without interruption," he recalled. "But I realized true presence actually requires more engagement, not less. It means actively processing what someone is saying rather than passively waiting for them to finish." This active quality of therapeutic presence leads us to the next crucial technique: reflective listening. Most of us think of listening as the absence of speaking, the pauses between our own contributions to a conversation. Therapists understand that effective listening is an active process that communicates understanding back to the speaker. Reflective listening involves periodically summarizing or paraphrasing what the other person has said, focusing particularly on the emotional content behind their words. This technique serves several critical functions. It demonstrates that you are paying attention, confirms your understanding, and encourages deeper exploration. For example, instead of responding to a friend's work complaint with your own similar experience, "I know what you mean, my boss is terrible too," a reflective response might be, "It sounds like you're feeling undervalued at work, especially when your ideas get overlooked in meetings." Eleanor practiced this technique during a conversation with a frustrated colleague at the conference. Rather than offering immediate advice or sharing her own experiences, she reflected back what she heard. So you're feeling caught between your team's expectations and what management is asking for, and that's creating a lot of stress for you. Her colleague's response was telling, "Exactly, that's exactly it. I've never been able to put it into words that clearly." This moment illustrates the power of reflection. It helps people feel not just heard but understood, often clarifying their own thoughts and feelings in the process. The key to effective reflection lies in capturing both the content and the emotion of what's been shared. Consider the difference between these two responses. So you're having problems with your roommate. Content only. It sounds like you're feeling frustrated and maybe even disrespected when your roommate uses your things without asking. Content and emotion. The second response demonstrates a deeper level of understanding and creates more opportunity for meaningful connection. Of course, in casual social settings, using formal therapeutic reflection techniques verbatim might feel awkward or artificial. The art lies in adapting these principles to fit natural conversation. Zane found success with simple phrases like, "Sounds like that was really important to you," or, "I get the impression that experience changed how you think about things." These informal reflections served the same purpose as more structured therapeutic responses but felt appropriate for friendly conversation. Another key technique therapists use to build connection is validation, communicating that the other person's feelings and experiences make sense given their circumstances, even if you might respond differently in the same situation. Validation differs from agreement. You don't need to share someone's perspective to validate their experience of it. Phrases like, "That makes sense given what you were dealing with," or, "I can see why you felt that way," communicate validation without necessarily endorsing a particular viewpoint. Eleanor used this approach when a potential client expressed frustration with her company's previous engineer. Rather than defending her profession or dismissing his complaints, she validated his experience. It's understandable you'd have concerns after that experience. Feeling like your needs weren't prioritized would be frustrating for anyone. This validation created space for trust that led to a productive conversation about how she would approach the project differently. These techniques, presence, reflective listening, and validation, form the core of therapeutic communication. But how do we integrate them into everyday interactions without seeming artificial or crossing boundaries? And what about authentic self-disclosure? After all, friendship requires mutual sharing, not just one person listening while the other speaks. The transition from employing therapeutic techniques to developing genuine connections requires a delicate balance. Use these skills too deliberately, and interactions can feel clinical or manipulative. Abandon them entirely, and you lose their powerful benefits. Zane Quincy discovered this challenge during a coffee meeting with a potential new friend. After 20 minutes of practicing reflective listening and validation, his companion looked at him quizzically and asked, "Are you a therapist or something? You have this way of talking that feels professional." This moment highlighted an important truth. Therapeutic techniques must be integrated naturally into your authentic communication style, not applied as a formula. The goal is not to become a therapist for your friends, but to incorporate therapists' most effective connection-building approaches into your natural interactions. The key to this integration lies in understanding the principles behind the techniques rather than mechanically applying specific phrases or methods. When you grasp the underlying principles, presence over performance, curiosity over judgment, understanding over advising, you can express them in ways that feel authentic to your personality and appropriate to the social context. For example, reflective listening doesn't always require formal paraphrasing. It might manifest as thoughtful follow-up questions, relevant personal connections, or simply an attentive nod that communicates, "I'm following what you're sharing." Eleanor Thomas found her engineering background actually complemented these techniques once she understood the principles behind them. "Engineers are trained to understand systems before attempting solutions," she explained. "I realized social connection works the same way. You need to understand the person before you can connect meaningfully with them." Rather than using textbook reflective statements, Eleanor incorporated her natural analytical skills by asking clarifying questions. "How did that solution work out?" Or, "What were the implications of that decision?" These questions serve the same purpose as formal reflection, demonstrating understanding and encouraging deeper sharing, while remaining true to her authentic communication style. Another crucial aspect of balancing therapeutic techniques with authentic connection is appropriate self-disclosure. Therapists maintain professional boundaries that limit personal sharing, but friendship requires mutual vulnerability. The question becomes, how and when should you share about yourself while using these connection-building approaches? Psychologist Susan Sprecker's research on reciprocal self-disclosure provides guidance here. Her studies show that relationships develop most effectively when self-disclosure is gradually matched in terms of intimacy and vulnerability. This disclosure reciprocity creates a sense of mutual trust and emotional investment. Zane applied this principle by matching the level of disclosure in his conversations. When someone shared a challenging work experience, he responded with a relevant personal story of similar emotional depth. When conversations remained light and casual, so did his disclosures. This matching created a natural rhythm of sharing that felt balanced rather than one-sided. I used to either share too much too soon or keep everything surface level, Zane reflected. Learning to match disclosure levels made conversations feel more like a dance and less like an interrogation or therapy session. The timing of self-disclosure also matters. Therapists understand that premature self-disclosure can shift focus away from the client and disrupt the building of rapport. Similarly, in social contexts, sharing too much about yourself before establishing mutual interest can overwhelm the interaction. Eleanor developed what she called the disclosure ratio, listening and asking questions for roughly 2/3 of the initial conversation, then gradually increasing her own sharing as rapport developed. This ratio isn't strict, but it helps me resist the urge to jump in with my own stories too quickly, she explained. By the end of a good conversation, it feels close to 50-50, but getting there gradually seems to work better. Context sensitivity represents another crucial element in adapting therapeutic techniques to everyday situations. Different social settings call for different approaches to connection. A networking event might require more structured exchanges and professional boundaries, while a casual gathering with friends allows for deeper exploration and greater vulnerability. A first date might benefit from balanced question asking and self-disclosure, while a family reunion might need more validation of long-established dynamics. Zane learned this lesson after attempting deep, reflective conversations at a high-energy party where most people were looking for light, playful interaction. I realized I was trying to have a quiet coffee shop conversation in a nightclub environment. He laughed. Context matters. Sometimes people just want to have fun, not explore their deepest feelings. This contextual awareness extends to cultural differences as well. Research by psychologist Geert Hofstede demonstrates that cultures vary significantly in their comfort with direct questions, emotional expression, and self-disclosure. What feels connecting in one cultural context might feel invasive or inappropriate in another. Eleanor, who frequently worked with international clients, developed sensitivity to these differences. In some cultures, building trust requires more time spent on formal pleasantries before personal sharing, she noted. In others, diving into substantive topics quickly is preferred. Being attentive to these cues matters tremendously. The development of these balanced connection skills follows a predictable learning curve. Initially, therapeutic techniques feel mechanical and self-conscious. You might find yourself mentally rehearsing reflective statements or reminding yourself to maintain presence. This stage can feel awkward, similar to learning any new skill. With practice, these approaches become integrated into your natural communication style. The conscious techniques transform into unconscious competence. You listen reflectively not because you're following a script, but because you're genuinely curious about the other person's experience. Zane described this evolution. At first, I had to remind myself to practice these techniques in every conversation. Now, 3 years later, I just find myself naturally curious about people in a way I never was before. The techniques became habits, and the habits changed how I relate to others. This integration process reveals an important truth. The ultimate goal isn't to master techniques, but to develop genuine curiosity about others' experiences. The techniques serve as training wheels that eventually give way to authentic connection skills. Psychologist Carl Rogers, pioneer of person-centered therapy, captured this principle in his concept of congruence, the alignment between inner experience and outward expression. Rogers argued that effective therapists must be congruent, meaning their use of therapeutic techniques reflects genuine interest rather than mechanical application. The same principle applies to social connection. When therapeutic techniques are employed as manipulation tactics without genuine interest, they create a sense of inauthenticity that others can intuitively detect. When they emerge from genuine curiosity and care, they enhance rather than undermine authenticity. Eleanor discovered this distinction when comparing her networking approach before and after integrating these skills. Before, I would ask questions because that's what networking guides told me to do, she recalled. Now I ask questions because I'm actually interested in the answers. People can feel the difference. This authentic integration addresses one of the most common concerns about using therapeutic techniques in everyday interactions: the fear of manipulating others. When these approaches stem from genuine interest rather than strategic calculation, they enhance authentic connection rather than substituting for it. As psychologist Irvin Yalom writes, the capacity to reach in and acknowledge the lived experience of the other is a profound form of acceptance. This reaching in, this genuine desire to understand, transforms therapeutic techniques from manipulation tactics into connection tools. But how do you develop this genuine curiosity if it doesn't come naturally? And how do you maintain authentic connection once the initial rapport has been established? These questions bring us to the deeper psychological shifts that sustain meaningful relationships over time. The problem wasn't that I didn't know how to ask good questions, Zane Quincy explained. The problem was that I didn't actually care about the answers. This honest self-assessment reveals a fundamental truth about connection. Techniques alone cannot create authentic relationships. The most powerful therapeutic approaches work because they combine skilled methods with genuine curiosity about the human experience. Developing this authentic curiosity requires inner work, psychological shifts that transform how we relate to others and ourselves. These shifts represent the deeper levels of therapeutic skill that go beyond techniques to touch the foundations of human connection. The first crucial shift involves moving from instrumental to intrinsic interest in others. Instrumental interest views relationships as means to ends, networking for career advancement, socializing for status, or connecting for practical benefits. Intrinsic interest values connection for its own sake, recognizing the inherent worth in understanding another person's experience. Therapists operate primarily from intrinsic interest. Though therapy serves practical purposes, effective therapists maintain genuine curiosity about their clients' inner worlds independent of treatment outcomes. Eleanor Thomas realized her networking had always been purely instrumental, focused on finding clients or making useful connections. I saw people as walking opportunities or obstacles, she admitted. When I began viewing each person as inherently interesting regardless of what they could do for me, everything changed. This shift from instrumental to intrinsic interest often requires conscious practice. Zane developed what he called curiosity prompts, questions he would ask himself before and during conversations. What might be interesting about this person that isn't immediately obvious? Or, what unique perspective might they have given their experiences? These prompts gradually rewired his approach to conversation, training his attention to seek genuine points of interest rather than strategic advantage. Over time, this practiced curiosity developed into authentic interest. He found himself genuinely wanting to understand others' experiences. Research supports the effectiveness of this approach. Psychologist Todd Kashdan has extensively studied the relationship between curiosity and well-being, finding that cultivating genuine curiosity about others not only improves relationships but also enhances personal happiness and resilience. The second inner shift involves developing comfort with uncertainty and difference. Therapists cultivate what psychologist Wilfred Bion called negative capability, the capacity to remain open to the unknown without prematurely imposing understanding or seeking closure. In everyday interactions, this means suspending the impulse to categorize others based on initial impressions or to quickly assess whether someone is like me or not like me. Instead, it involves maintaining open curiosity even, perhaps especially, when encountering perspectives different from your own. Eleanor found this shift particularly challenging as an engineer accustomed to defining problems and implementing solutions. I had to learn to sit with confusion, she reflected. When someone expressed a viewpoint that seemed illogical to me, my instinct was to correct or dismiss it. Learning to get curious about how they arrived at that perspective, without immediately judging it, opened entirely new dimensions of connection. This comfort with uncertainty directly counters what psychologists call cognitive closure, the desire for definite answers and resolution of ambiguity. While closure provides psychological comfort, it often comes at the expense of deeper understanding and connection. Zane noticed his discomfort with uncertainty manifested as a tendency to finish other sentences or jump to conclusions about their experiences. I realized I was rushing to demonstrate understanding rather than taking the time to actually understand, he explained. Slowing down and allowing for ambiguity felt uncomfortable at first but led to much richer connections. Practicing this comfort with uncertainty might involve consciously extending your listening time before responding, asking follow-up questions rather than making assumptions, or simply acknowledging when you don't fully understand someone's experience. The third inner shift involves developing what therapists call affect tolerance, the capacity to be present with difficult emotions, both your own and others, without immediately attempting to fix, change, or avoid them. Most social interactions involve implicit emotional regulation. We steer conversations toward positive topics, offer premature reassurance when others express distress, or use humor to defuse emotional intensity. While these moves can be appropriate, they often prevent deeper connection by signaling discomfort with authentic emotional expression. Therapists develop the capacity to stay present with the full range of human emotion, recognizing that emotional authenticity, not perpetual positivity, creates the conditions for meaningful connection. Eleanor discovered her tendency to deflect emotional moments during an interaction with a colleague who shared frustrations about his career path. My immediate response was to jump into problem-solving mode, she recalled. It took conscious effort to simply acknowledge his feelings without trying to fix them. The relief on his face when I just said, "That sounds really disappointing," was remarkable. Developing affect tolerance involves practicing presence with your own emotions first, noticing physical sensations of discomfort without immediately acting to alleviate them. This personal practice creates capacity for remaining present when others express difficult feelings. Zane worked on this skill through mindfulness meditation, which research has shown increases both emotional awareness and regulation. I noticed I would physically tense up when conversations turned to negative emotions, he observed. Meditation helped me recognize this reaction without being controlled by it, which made me more available for authentic connection. The fourth inner shift involves developing genuine empathy, the capacity to understand others' experiences from their perspective rather than viewing them through the lens of your own experiences. Contrary to popular understanding, empathy isn't simply feeling what others feel. Therapists practice what psychologists call cognitive empathy, the ability to take another person's perspective while maintaining awareness of the distinction between their experience and your own. This cognitive empathy differs from both emotional contagion, absorbing others' emotions, and projection, assuming others feel as you would in their situation. It involves active perspective-taking, attempting to understand the internal logic of another person's experience on their terms. Eleanor found her analytical mind well-suited to this form of empathy once she recognized its value. I approach it almost like solving an equation with missing variables, she explained. Given what I know about this person's background, values, and current situation, how might they be experiencing this moment? What factors might I be missing that would help me understand their perspective? This analytical approach to empathy might seem counterintuitive, but research supports its effectiveness. Studies by psychologist William Ikes show that accurate empathic understanding involves active cognitive processing rather than pure emotional resonance. Developing this cognitive empathy involves practice in perspective-taking. Zane would sometimes deliberately adopt different viewpoints when watching news stories or reading about conflicts. I would practice articulating positions I disagreed with in their strongest form, he explained. Not to change my own views, but to strengthen my ability to understand how others arrive at different conclusions. These four inner shifts, from instrumental to intrinsic interest, developing comfort with uncertainty, building affect tolerance, and cultivating cognitive empathy, represent the psychological foundations of therapeutic connection. They transform techniques from mechanical procedures into authentic expressions of human understanding. This transformation addresses a common objection to therapeutic approaches in everyday life, the concern that such approaches feel manipulative or artificial. When therapeutic techniques emerge from genuine curiosity, comfort with difference, emotional presence, and authentic empathy, they enhance rather than undermine authenticity. As psychologist Irvin Yalom writes, though the formal techniques of therapy are many, their effective ingredients are few and universally applicable. These effective ingredients, presence, curiosity, acceptance, and understanding, create connection whether in clinical settings or casual conversations. The development of these inner capacities takes time and practice. Just as therapists spend years honing their ability to create meaningful connections, integrating these approaches into your social interactions represents an ongoing journey rather than a destination. Eleanor described this journey as gradually finding her authentic voice within therapeutic principles. At first, I felt like I was playing a role, the good listener, the empathic friend, she recalled. But over time, these approaches became integrated into who I am. Now they don't feel like techniques at all, they're just how I relate to people. This integration points toward the ultimate goal. Not performing therapeutic techniques, but developing the inner capacities that make genuine connection possible. As these capacities develop, the formal aspects of therapeutic communication become less important than the authentic presence they enable. But what does this integrated approach look like in practice? How do you apply these principles in specific challenging social situations? And how do you maintain boundaries while creating space for authentic connection? These practical questions bring us to the application of therapeutic principles in everyday social contexts. The coffee shop fell silent as Zane Quincy faced what many consider a social nightmare. An acquaintance sharing unexpected, deeply personal information within minutes of what was supposed to be a casual catch-up. His college classmate Jacob had just revealed he was considering divorce after discovering his wife's infidelity. In the past, Zane would have panicked, either changing the subject, offering premature advice, or sharing an inappropriately personal story of his own. Instead, drawing on therapeutic principles, he took a breath, maintained eye contact, and simply said, "That sounds incredibly painful. I appreciate you trusting me enough to share this." This response, validating the emotion without overreaching, opened space for Jacob to continue sharing at his own pace. By the end of their conversation, Jacob thanked Zane for listening, noting, "I haven't been able to talk about this with anyone without them immediately telling me what to do." This scenario illustrates how therapeutic principles can transform challenging social situations from awkward moments to meaningful connections. The application of these principles varies across contexts, requiring both flexibility and discernment. Let us examine how these approaches work in specific situations that many find socially challenging. The first challenging scenario involves navigating group conversations where connection often seems impossible. Whether at parties, networking events, or social gatherings, group dynamics can inhibit the depth that therapeutic approaches facilitate. Eleanor Thomas developed specific strategies for creating meaningful connection even within group settings. "I realized I didn't need to connect deeply with the entire group simultaneously," she explained. "Instead, I could create micro-moments of connection with individuals within the group context. These micro-moments involve briefly applying therapeutic principles, making eye contact with someone who seems disengaged, asking a follow-up question that acknowledges a comment others missed, or validating an experience that the group has glossed over." For example, at an industry conference, Eleanor noticed a younger engineer whose comment had been talked over by more senior colleagues. During a break in the conversation, she said quietly, "I thought you made an excellent point about the integration challenges. Has that been your experience on previous projects?" This brief exchange created a moment of authentic connection amidst the broader group dynamics. Research supports this micro-moment approach. Psychologist Barbara Fredrickson's work on positivity resonance demonstrates that brief, authentic connections create measurable benefits for psychological well-being, even when they last only seconds. Zane applied similar principles when navigating what he called connection-resistant environments, settings like large parties where surface-level interaction is the norm. Rather than fighting the context by attempting deep conversations immediately, he used therapeutic presence as a starting point, remaining fully engaged even in lighter interactions. I discovered that quality of attention matters more than topic depth, he noted. Being fully present for a conversation about the weather creates more connection than being distracted during a conversation about life goals. This presence allowed Zane to identify moments when deeper connection became possible, subtle signals that someone might welcome more meaningful exchange. These signals include lengthier responses, personal disclosures, or questions that go beyond social scripts. The second challenging scenario involves connecting with people whose communication styles or backgrounds differ significantly from your own. Whether due to cultural differences, neurodiversity, or simply distinct personality types, these interactions often generate discomfort that prevents authentic connection. Eleanor, whose work involved international collaborations, developed an approach she called curiosity before conclusion. When encountering communication differences, like a colleague who rarely made eye contact or another who spoke in what seemed like tangents, she suspended judgment and became curious about the meaning behind these differences. I used to interpret lack of eye contact as disinterest or dishonesty, she admitted. When I learned that in some cultures sustained eye contact can be considered disrespectful or aggressive, it completely changed my reaction. Now I look for patterns of engagement rather than expecting everyone to connect the same way I do. This approach aligns with research on cross-cultural communication, which shows that awareness of cultural differences in interaction styles significantly improves connection across boundaries. Rather than expecting others to adapt to your communication preferences, therapeutic curiosity involves discovering how connection works for them. Zane applied similar principles when interacting with neurodivergent colleagues, including a team member with autism who communicated in ways initially challenging for him to interpret. Instead of assuming his direct communication style was rudeness, I got curious about how he experienced our interactions, Zane explained. That curiosity led to a conversation where he shared how exhausting it was for him to decipher the indirect communication others expected. This conversation transformed their relationship, creating space for mutually satisfying interaction that respected their different communication needs. The third challenging scenario involves setting boundaries while maintaining connection, navigating situations where therapeutic openness must be balanced with personal limits. Therapists master this balance through what they call compassionate boundaries, limits expressed with clarity and kindness rather than judgment or defensiveness. These boundaries protect the therapist's well-being while preserving the therapeutic relationship. Eleanor adapted this approach after finding herself overwhelmed by a colleague who frequently sought emotional support during work hours. Rather than either silently resenting these interruptions or abruptly cutting them off, she expressed a compassionate boundary. I can see you're going through something difficult, and I value our conversations. Right now, I need to focus on this deadline. Could we talk for 15 minutes at the end of the day instead? This response acknowledged the colleague's need while asserting Eleanor's limits, combining empathy with clear boundaries. Zane faced similar challenges with friends who expected him to function as an unpaid therapist after noticing his improved listening skills. One friend started calling me at all hours expecting emotional support, he recalled. I had to learn that setting limits was actually better for our friendship than becoming resentful by overextending myself. He developed a practice of bounded availability, being fully present during defined interaction periods, while maintaining clear limits about his availability. This boundary setting actually improved his closest friendships by preventing the burnout that comes from unlimited emotional labor. The fourth challenging scenario involves navigating conflict while maintaining connection, perhaps the ultimate test of therapeutic principles in everyday relationships. Therapists understand that conflict, when approached with presence and curiosity rather than defensiveness, can deepen rather than damage relationships. They use techniques like affect labeling, naming emotions present in the interaction, and circular questioning, exploring how each person's actions influence the other, to transform conflicts into opportunities for understanding. Eleanor applied these principles during a tense disagreement with a project partner. Rather than defending her position or attacking his, she got curious about the concerns underlying his opposition. You seem frustrated with this approach. Help me understand what specific concerns you have about the direction I'm suggesting, she offered. This curiosity-based response created space for him to express legitimate concerns that ultimately improved their solution. By separating the problem from the person, another therapeutic principle, Eleanor maintained connection even during disagreement. Zane similarly transformed a recurring conflict with his roommate over household responsibilities. Instead of making accusations, "You never clean the kitchen," he expressed his experience using what therapists call I statements. "I feel frustrated when I come home to dishes in the sink because it makes more work for me when I want to cook." This approach invited discussion rather than defensiveness, ultimately leading to a conversation about different cleanliness standards and competing priorities that resolved the underlying pattern. These practical applications demonstrate how therapeutic principles can transform challenging social situations from sources of anxiety to opportunities for authentic connection. The key lies not in perfectly executing techniques, but in bringing therapeutic presence, curiosity, and understanding to ordinary interactions. As Eleanor reflected, the most surprising outcome wasn't how others responded to these approaches, though that was remarkably positive. The real surprise was how they changed my experience of social interaction from something draining to something energizing. This shift in personal experience points to perhaps the most important aspect of applying therapeutic principles to everyday connection. These approaches don't just improve your relationships with others, they transform your relationship with yourself. The most unexpected benefit of applying therapeutic principles to social interactions appeared months into Zane Quincy's practice. After focusing intently on understanding others, he realized something profound had shifted in his relationship with himself. "I had spent years trying to figure myself out through self-help books, personality tests, and endless introspection," Zane explained. "But something about deeply listening to others helped me hear my own inner voice with greater clarity than all that self-analysis ever did." This experience reflects what psychologists call the self-connection paradox, the counterintuitive truth that understanding others often leads to better self-understanding. This paradox lies at the heart of both therapeutic work and authentic friendship. Therapists have long recognized that their own self-awareness deepens through the practice of understanding others. The focused attention they bring to client experiences creates a reflective space that illuminates their own patterns, reactions, and values. This same process occurs when we apply therapeutic principles in everyday relationships. By developing genuine curiosity about others' experiences, we simultaneously develop a clearer understanding of our own. Eleanor Thomas noticed this effect after several months of practicing therapeutic communication. "When I really listened to how others described their challenges and aspirations, it created a mirror that helped me recognize patterns in my own life," she observed. Conversations became opportunities for mutual discovery rather than performance or extraction. This mutual discovery reflects what philosopher Martin Buber described as the I-thou relationship, an encounter between authentic selves that transforms both parties. Unlike the I-it relationship, where others are treated as objects to be used or managed, the I-thou connection creates space for genuine presence and reciprocal growth. Several psychological mechanisms explain how understanding others enhances self-understanding. First, attentive listening to others' experiences creates cognitive patterns that we naturally apply to ourselves. The questions we learn to ask others, "What meaning does this hold for you?" or "How does this connect to your values?" gradually become questions we ask ourselves. Zane noticed this pattern when facing a career decision. "I realized I was using the same open-ended, curious questions with myself that I had practiced using with friends," he recalled. "Instead of my usual anxious self-interrogation, I was approaching my own experience with the same acceptance I'd learned to offer others." Second, witnessing others' authentic self-expression creates permission for our own. When we create space for others to express vulnerability, uncertainty, or complex emotions, we implicitly recognize the validity of these experiences, a recognition that extends to our own similar feelings. Eleanor found that after months of practicing validation with others, her internal self-talk became noticeably kinder. "I used to have this harsh inner critic that would dismiss my emotions as overreactions or weaknesses," she explained. After spending so much time validating others' feelings as natural and understandable, I started automatically extending that same courtesy to myself. Third, therapeutic listening develops metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe our own thoughts and reactions without immediately identifying with them. When we practice presence with others, we strengthen the observing self that can witness our own experience without being swept away by it. Zane described this shift. I became better at noticing my reactions during conversations, moments of judgment, discomfort, or connection, without acting on them immediately. This same observing capacity carried over when I was alone, helping me recognize thought patterns that had been invisible before. This metacognitive awareness represents a core component of psychological well-being. Research by psychologist Ryan Nemec shows that the ability to observe our thoughts and feelings without being controlled by them predicts greater resilience, emotional regulation, and life satisfaction. Fourth, therapeutic connection creates what psychologist Donald Winnicott called holding environments, relational spaces where authentic expression feels safe and validated. These environments allow aspects of ourselves that might otherwise remain hidden to emerge and be integrated into our self-understanding. Eleanor experienced this effect through a friendship developed using therapeutic principles. There were parts of my experience I had never verbalized until this friend created space for them, she reflected. Speaking these thoughts aloud to someone who received them with curiosity rather than judgment helped me accept aspects of myself I had previously denied or minimized. The self-connection paradox reveals an important truth about human psychology. We are inherently relational beings who discover ourselves through connection with others. The therapeutic principles that enhance understanding of others simultaneously deepen our relationship with ourselves. This dual development creates a virtuous cycle. As we understand ourselves better, we become more capable of authentic connection with others. As these connections deepen, they further enhance our self-understanding. Each dimension reinforces the other. Zane noticed the cycle accelerating over time. The more comfortable I became with my own thoughts and feelings, the more authentically I could connect with others, he observed. And the more authentic those connections became, the safer I felt exploring aspects of myself I'd previously kept hidden. This cycle directly counters the common belief that self-development requires isolation or self-focus. While periods of reflection serve important purposes, the therapeutic perspective suggests that our deepest self-understanding emerges through authentic engagement with others. As psychologist Jean Baker Miller writes in her relational cultural theory, growth-fostering relationships are a central human necessity and disconnection is a primary source of suffering. The therapeutic principles we've explored create exactly these growth-fostering connections. This integration of self-development with relationship development addresses a false dichotomy in popular psychology, the notion that we must work on ourselves before we can form healthy connections with others. The therapeutic perspective suggests instead that these processes occur simultaneously, each facilitating the other. Eleanor found this integrated approach transformative after years of alternating between self-improvement projects and relationship-building efforts. I had always separated these as distinct pursuits, she explained. Learning that my connections with others could deepen my relationship with myself, and vice versa, completely changed my approach to both. The self-connection paradox also explains why therapeutic skills feel increasingly natural with practice. As these approaches enhance your self-understanding, they become expressions of your authentic self rather than techniques you're applying. The boundary between using therapeutic principles and being yourself gradually dissolves. Zane described this evolution. At first, practicing these approaches felt like wearing someone else's clothes, useful but not quite fitting right. Now they feel like my natural way of being. The person I become through these connections feels more authentically me than the person I was before. This authentic integration represents the ultimate goal of applying therapeutic principles to everyday connections. Not becoming a therapist for your friends, but becoming more fully yourself through growth-fostering relationships. As therapist Carl Rogers wrote, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." The therapeutic principles we've explored create acceptance both from others and within ourselves, facilitating natural growth in both dimensions. This brings us to the final and perhaps most important question. How do we integrate these approaches into our daily lives in a sustainable way? How do we transform therapeutic principles from techniques we occasionally remember to apply into natural expressions of who we are becoming? The sunlight streamed through the coffee shop window as Eleanor Thomas realized something had fundamentally changed. She was having a completely ordinary conversation with a new acquaintance, yet there was nothing ordinary about the quality of connection they were experiencing. The therapeutic principles she had been consciously practicing for months had become effortless. She wasn't thinking about reflective listening or validation. She was simply being present with another human being. I knew then that these approaches had become part of me, Eleanor later reflected. It wasn't about applying techniques anymore. It was just how I naturally related to people. This moment of integration represents the ultimate goal when incorporating therapeutic principles into everyday interactions. Rather than permanently adding another layer of self-consciousness, am I listening actively enough? Or should I validate that feeling? The aim is to develop new relational habits that eventually become automatic. This integration follows a predictable learning curve that psychologists call the conscious competence model. The journey begins with unconscious incompetence, not realizing what we're missing in our connections, progresses through conscious incompetence, recognizing our relational gaps, and conscious competence, deliberately applying new approaches, and finally arrives at unconscious competence, the natural, effortless application of skills that once required concentration. Reaching this final stage of integration requires deliberate practice, specific strategies, and patience with the learning process. Let us explore how to transform therapeutic techniques from conscious efforts to natural expressions. The first key to integration is what psychologists call deliberate practice. Focused effort on specific aspects of a skill with immediate feedback and gradual progression. Unlike casual practice, deliberate practice involves targeted improvement rather than mere repetition. Zane Quincy developed a systematic approach to this deliberate practice. I would focus on one specific skill for 2 weeks before adding another, he explained. First, just maintaining presence, then adding reflective responses, then practicing validation. Trying to change everything at once was overwhelming, but this focused approach made it manageable. This systematic progression allowed each skill to become more natural before adding complexity. Research on habit formation supports this approach, showing that attempting too many changes simultaneously typically leads to abandoning all of them. Eleanor similarly focused her practice on specific contexts before expanding. I started applying these principles just in one-on-one professional meetings, where the structure made it easier to maintain awareness, she recalled. Only after those interactions felt natural did I expand to social settings and group conversations. This contextual practice creates environmental cues that trigger new relational habits. By repeatedly associating specific situations with therapeutic approaches, you develop automatic associations that eventually require less conscious effort. The second integration strategy involves creating implementation intentions, specific plans that link situations to desired responses. Unlike vague intentions, "I'll be a better listener," implementation intentions follow the format, "When X happens, I will do Y." Zane created several such intentions. When someone shares a difficulty, I will validate their feeling before offering any suggestions. Or, when I notice myself planning my response instead of listening, I will take a breath and refocus on the speaker. Research by psychologist Peter Gallwitzer demonstrates that these specific if-then plans significantly increase follow-through on intentions, especially during stressful or demanding situations when conscious control is limited. Eleanor applied this approach to common conversational challenges. When someone makes a statement I strongly disagree with, I will get curious about how they arrived at that perspective before expressing my view. Or, when group conversation becomes competitive, I will create space for quieter voices by asking for their thoughts. These implementation intentions gradually reshape conversational habits, creating new automatic responses that align with therapeutic principles. The third integration strategy involves environmental design, structuring your physical and social environments to support therapeutic connection. Our surroundings powerfully influence our behavior, often more than our conscious intentions. Zane modified his physical environments to enhance presence. I started positioning my phone face down and out of reach during conversations, he explained. I also found that sitting in chairs without tables between people made me more attentive to body language and emotional cues. These environmental adjustments reduced distractions and enhanced the conditions for connection. Research confirms that merely having a phone visible, even if not used, significantly reduces perceived connection and conversation quality. Eleanor similarly engineered her social environment by intentionally spending time with people who valued depth over performance. I noticed certain friends brought out my more authentic, curious self while others triggered my performing, impressing self, she observed. I gradually shifted my time toward relationships that reinforced the connection style I wanted to develop. This social environment design creates reinforcement for therapeutic approaches. When others respond positively to your presence and curiosity, these behaviors naturally strengthen through what behaviorists call operant conditioning. The fourth integration strategy involves developing personalized bridges between therapeutic principles and your authentic style. Rather than applying generic techniques, effective integration adapts these principles to fit your unique personality and strengths. Zane, naturally analytical and sometimes awkward with emotional language, found his own expressions for validation that felt authentic. That makes perfect sense given what you were dealing with, or, I can follow your reasoning there. These phrases served the same validating function while matching his natural communication style. Eleanor similarly integrated therapeutic listening into her engineering mindset. I approach understanding people almost like reverse engineering their perspective, she explained. What inputs led to this output? What assumptions underlie this conclusion? This analytical curiosity feels natural to me while serving the same purpose as therapeutic techniques. These personalized bridges prevent the disconnection that occurs when applying techniques that feel foreign to your authentic self. The goal isn't to become someone else, but to enhance your natural style with therapeutic principles. The fifth integration strategy involves self-compassion during the learning process. Developing new relational habits inevitably includes awkward moments, mistakes, and setbacks. How you respond to these challenges significantly affects whether you continue progressing or abandon the journey. Zane initially berated himself for conversational missteps, interrupting, problem-solving prematurely, or losing presence. I would mentally replay conversations and criticize every mistake, he recalled. This self-criticism actually made it harder to improve because I became self-conscious and hesitant. He developed a more productive approach through what psychologists call growth mindset, viewing challenges as learning opportunities rather than evidence of fixed limitations. When conversations didn't go as planned, Zane would ask himself, "What can I learn from this for next time?" rather than "What's wrong with me?" Research by psychologist Kristen Neff demonstrates that self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend, enhances learning and resilience far more effectively than self-criticism. Eleanor similarly practiced self-compassion through what she called learning conversations rather than performance conversations. I designated certain interactions as explicit practice opportunities where I gave myself permission to be imperfect, she explained. This reduced the pressure and actually accelerated my progress. This self-compassion creates the psychological safety necessary for genuine learning and integration. Just as therapeutic approaches create safety for others to express themselves authentically, self-compassion creates internal safety for your own growth process. As these integration strategies take effect, therapeutic principles gradually transform from conscious techniques into natural expressions. The transition often happens so subtly that you only recognize the change in retrospect. Zane described this realization. I was having dinner with a friend when he commented that I was the best listener he knew. It struck me that I hadn't been thinking about listening techniques at all. I was just genuinely interested in what he was sharing. Somewhere along the way, presence had become my default rather than something I had to remember to practice. This integration represents the true goal of applying therapeutic principles to everyday connections. Not performing therapeutic techniques, but becoming a person whose natural presence creates space for authentic connection. As therapist and philosopher Eugene Gendlin wrote, "What is true is already so. Owning up to it doesn't make it worse. Not being open about it doesn't make it go away. And because it's true, it is what is there to be interacted with. Anything untrue isn't there to be lived. People can stand what is true, for they are already enduring it. This insight captures the essence of therapeutic connection, creating space where truth can be acknowledged, expressed, and accepted. As these principles become integrated into your natural style, you become someone with whom others can be authentic because they sense you will receive their truth with presence and understanding. Eleanor experienced this integration as a profound shift in how others responded to her. People started seeking me out for conversations, she noted. One colleague told me I was the only person she could talk to without feeling judged. Another said conversations with me helped him understand himself better. These weren't responses to techniques I was using. They were responses to who I had become. This becoming represents the ultimate value of therapeutic principles in everyday life. Beyond improving specific interactions or relationships, these approaches gradually transform your fundamental way of being with others and yourself. As you continue integrating these principles, you may notice subtle but significant changes. Conversations that once felt draining become energizing. Relationships develop depth more naturally. Your internal experience becomes more accepting and curious, and connection begins to feel less like work and more like a natural expression of who you are. These changes reflect what therapist Carl Rogers described as becoming more fully human, developing your capacity for authentic presence, genuine curiosity, and compassionate understanding. As these qualities become integrated into your natural style, you create spaces where others can become more fully themselves as well. Zane Quincy sat across from his sister at their favorite restaurant, listening intently as she described her recent job transition. 2 years earlier, this conversation would have followed a predictable script. His sister would share briefly, Zane would immediately relate with his own similar experience. Then they would move on to another topic, maintaining the pleasant but somewhat distant relationship they had always had. Today was different. As Zane listened with the therapeutic presence he had been developing, his sister gradually shared more than just the factual details of her career change. She spoke about her fears of inadequacy in the new role, her complex feelings about leaving colleagues behind, and her hopes for what this transition might mean for her future. When she finished, she looked somewhat surprised. "I didn't mean to talk so much," she said, "but something about how you listened made it easy to share things I usually keep to myself." This moment captures the ripple effect of integrating therapeutic principles into everyday connections. The changes that begin as personal practice eventually transform not just your interactions but the quality of connection possible for those around you. This ripple effect operates through several mechanisms that extend the impact of your therapeutic approach far beyond individual conversations. First, therapeutic presence creates psychological safety that enables others to access and express aspects of themselves typically hidden in everyday interaction. When people experience this authentic connection with you, they often carry this expanded self-awareness into other relationships. Eleanor Thomas noticed this effect with her engineering team. After months of practicing therapeutic principles in her management style, she observed team members using similar approaches with each other. They started asking more curiosity-based questions and showing more comfort with emotion in their interactions, she noted. "I never explicitly taught these skills. They absorbed them through our conversations." This modeling effect reflects what psychologists call social learning. We naturally adopt behaviors we observe in others, especially those we respect or connect with. By practicing therapeutic principles, you implicitly demonstrate these approaches for everyone you interact with. Second, therapeutic connection satisfies fundamental psychological needs that, when met, enable greater generosity and presence with others. Research on self-determination theory identifies autonomy, competence, and relatedness as core human needs that, when fulfilled, create the psychological resources for prosocial behavior. Zane experienced this effect as his practice of therapeutic principles deepened over time. "When I started, I had to consciously remind myself to be present and curious," he recalled. "But as these conversations filled my own need for meaningful connection, being present for others became less effortful. It was like these satisfying interactions created energy that made it easier to show up authentically for the next person." This regenerative quality of authentic connection creates sustainability that performance-based interaction lacks. While trying to impress others depletes psychological resources, creating genuine connection often replenishes them. Third, Therapeutic approaches interrupt patterns of superficial interaction that often persist simply because everyone assumes they are expected. By demonstrating that deeper connection is both possible and welcome, you create permission for authenticity that extends beyond your direct interactions. Eleanor observed this pattern interruption effect at industry conferences. When I began having more substantial conversations amid the usual networking small talk, something interesting happened, she explained. People who observed or participated in these interactions would later initiate deeper conversations with others. It was like they needed evidence that genuine exchange was appropriate in that context. This permission-giving effect can transform the culture of entire social systems, families, friend groups, work teams, or communities. As organizational psychologist Edgar Schein notes, culture is largely maintained through unspoken assumptions about what is acceptable. When these assumptions are challenged through consistent modeling of alternatives, cultural norms can shift surprisingly quickly. Fourth, therapeutic connection creates what sociologists call positive deviance, beneficial differences from typical patterns that can spread through social networks. When your interactions consistently create more satisfaction, understanding, and authenticity than the norm, others naturally become curious about your approach. Zane noticed this curiosity manifesting as direct questions. Friends started asking how I had become a good listener or commenting that conversations with me felt different, he recalled. These questions created natural opportunities to share some of the principles I had been practicing, extending their impact beyond my own interactions. This organic teaching function multiplies the effect of your personal practice. While you might directly interact with dozens of people, the principles you share could eventually influence hundreds or thousands through subsequent connections. Fifth, therapeutic approaches create compound benefits over time as deeper understanding in early interactions enables greater trust and authenticity in later ones. Unlike transactional relationships that remain at the same depth regardless of duration, therapeutically informed connections tend to deepen progressively. Eleanor experienced this compounding effect with both colleagues and friends. Conversations build on each other in a different way now, she observed. Because we establish trust through real understanding in earlier interactions, people start our conversations at a deeper level rather than having to work through layers of social performance first. This progressive deepening creates relationships that become increasingly valuable and satisfying over time, a stark contrast to connections that begin with high intensity but quickly plateau when performance becomes unsustainable. These ripple effects transform the impact of therapeutic principles from individual improvement to social contribution. By developing your capacity for authentic connection, you don't just enhance your own relationships. You contribute to a culture where meaningful human connection becomes more possible for everyone you encounter. This broader impact addresses what many social commentators identify as a defining challenge of our time: widespread loneliness and disconnection despite unprecedented technological connectivity. Recent research reveals loneliness rates that constitute a public health crisis, with physical and psychological effects comparable to smoking or obesity. The therapeutic principles we've explored offer a response to this crisis not through systemic change or technological innovation, but through transformed human presence. By creating spaces where others feel truly seen and understood, you contribute to addressing a fundamental human need that no institutional solution can fully satisfy. As psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote, "For the meaning of life differs from man to man, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. This meaning emerges largely through authentic connection, moments where we recognize and are recognized by others in our full humanity." The therapeutic principles we've explored create precisely these meaning-generating connections in everyday interactions. The practice of these principles constitutes what philosopher Martin Buber might call a confirmation of meaning, an affirmation through presence and understanding that another person's experience matters. In a culture often characterized by distraction and instrumental relationships, this confirmation meets a profound human need. As you continue integrating therapeutic approaches into your natural style, remember that your practice creates benefits extending far beyond your immediate experience. The quality of presence you develop becomes a gift not just to those you directly encounter but to everyone they subsequently interact with, a ripple effect of authentic connection in a world that deeply needs it. The ultimate measure of success in this practice isn't technique mastery but transformed presence. Becoming someone with whom others can be authentic because they sense you will receive their truth with understanding. As therapist Carl Rogers wrote, "When I have been listened to and when I have been heard, I am able to reperceive my world in a new way and to go on." This capacity to help others reperceive their world through authentic connection represents the essence of therapeutic principles in everyday life. By developing this capacity, you create not just better conversations but more possibilities for human flourishing, your own and others. This journey begins with a single conversation approached with genuine presence and curiosity. It continues through deliberate practice, self-compassion, and gradual integration. And it expands through the ripple effects of transformed connection, contributing to a world where meaningful human understanding becomes more possible with each authentic exchange. The key to making friends like a therapist without feeling awkward isn't mastering techniques but becoming someone who creates spaces where authenticity feels safer than performance, transforming not just how you connect with others, but how they connect with themselves.